In this session, we're going to provide an overview of running Jabber, also referred to as XMPP or multi-switch CLI on your Arista switches. XMPP stands for Extensible Messaging and Presence Protocol. You can get some history of XMPP by reading the IETF's RFCs 2779 from the year 2000, 3920, and 3921, both from the year 2004. Specifically, RFC 3920 provides a good explanation of their intent at the time. The Extensible Messaging and Presence Protocol, XMPP, is an open XML protocol for near real-time messaging, presence, and request response services. The basic syntax and semantics were developed originally within the Jabber open source community, mainly in 1999. In 2002, the XMPP working group was chartered with developing an adaptation of the Jabber protocol. So we're going to chat with our switches using IM, or instant messaging. This comes in handy on many levels. First, as operations, picture a system admin walking up to you and letting you know that a particular server is having a problem. The system admin provides you an IP address, but doesn't know exactly where the server lives, and you may have over 50 switches to check to find where it's connected. This is where Jabber can save a considerable amount of time. Rather than having to log into 50 switches and issuing the command show MAC address-table pipe include and the last four characters of the server's MAC address on all 50 of the switches, you could use an instant messaging client and query all of your switches in one chat window. Only the switch with the MAC address in its table will respond to your query. So that was an operations example. But what about project-related work and configurations? Let's say you have a new requirement to update an access list that you use on 10 switches. Rather than having to log into each switch individually, you could run the multi-switch CLI feature of XMPP and configure all 10 switches at once, and just as easily issue a show access list command across all of them at once to verify that your change was successful. The best part of this feature? It's free. You can install an open source XMPP server of your choosing. Some folks like the eJabberD. As an example, in this lab, we have Ignite's real-time OpenFire XMPP server installed. Once you have the XMPP server installed and configured with usernames and passwords, you need to configure the XMPP on your switches. By default, management via XMPP is disabled. The management XMPP command puts you into management XMPP configuration mode. So we'll type config and hit enter, and then management space XMPP and hit enter. Next, you need to configure the IP address or DNS name of the XMPP server and the switch's username and password. So while you're in management XMPP configuration mode, we'll enter no space shutdown, enter, and next we'll add the server's IP address. For this lab, I'm using server, so we'll type server space 192.168.0.4 and hit enter. Then we're going to put in the switch's username. So we're going to type username space s1 at arista.lab space password space. In this case, I'm just going to use the password Arista. Enter. And then finally, we need to enter the domain. So we're going to type in domain space arista.lab and hit enter. Now, I like to leverage groups. Groups will give me the option to have the switches join a group chat so that I can send commands to multiple switches at once. You can set up whatever groupings make sense for your environment. So some examples might include a group that has all switches in the East data center, or all switches in the West data center. Or perhaps I could have all switches in the DMZ and another group called all switches not in the DMZ. In this lab, we're going to use a few groups. One is called spines, one is called leafs, and then we're going to have a group that's called all. So every one of the switches in my lab will join the all group. My leafs will join the leafs group, and my spines will join the spines group. Let's configure S1 to join both the all group and the spines group. So while still in management XMPP configuration mode, on switch 1, we're going to add switch dash group space, and we call this group spines at conference.arista.lab. Enter. And then for the all group, we're going to use switch dash group all at conference.arista.lab. Enter. We can type end to get out of the management XMPP configuration mode. So now we want to verify. We could use the show XMPP status command and hit enter. And we can see our XMPP server is the 192.168.0.4, and the port that we're using, in this case, it's 5222. We have our client username, our default domain, our default privilege level for received commands. So yes, as a side note, we can send commands from one switch to another via XMPP. And then we see our connection status, and we are connected. There's a couple more commands we can use. There's a show XMPP neighbors command, and we can see all of our neighbors that are in this lab. So we have leaf 1, leaf 2, leaf 3, leaf 4, and then there's also spine 2. And then we can use the show XMPP switch dash group command to see which groups this switch is a member of. If we hit enter, we can see the all at conference.arista.lab as well as the spines at conference.arista.lab. So now I'm going to show you chatting with the switches. On my Mac, I have the ADM client installed. And on the right-hand side, you can see all the switches that are in the lab and that have joined our group chat. So in the all switches group chat, I can send commands to all of them at once. So for instance, I can send the command show version and hit enter. And in the output, if we scroll back, we can see every switch sent us the output of a show version command. So we have S1, leaf 4, S2, leaf 3, and so on. How about hunting down a MAC address, like in the example I gave earlier? So for all the switches, I can issue the command show space MAC space address dash table and hit enter. And now I'm going to get the MAC address table from every one of the switches. So we have leaf 1, leaf 2, and this is a lab, so I don't have very many MAC addresses out there. There's a MAC address table of spine 1. Next, let's send a query to all of our switches, focusing on a piece of information that only one of them would have. So for instance, we could type the command in the group chat window in the ADM client. We could type show run pipe grep, and I'm going to put in an IP address. It's one of the management IP addresses for one of the switches. So 192.168.0.10. Now only one of the switches has this IP address configured on it. So when I hit enter, only one should respond. And there we go. Switch 1 or spine 1 responded, and in his configuration, he has IP address 192.168.0.10. We could do another one. We could type show, run, pipe, grep, and then the word leafs, and hit enter. And in doing that, we see only our leafs responded. We have leaf 2, leaf 4, leaf 1, and leaf 3. And the reason they responded is because each of them is a member of the leafs chat group. And so with the switch dash group leafs at conference.arista.lab, they have the keyword leafs in their configuration. And so only those responded. S1 and S2 didn't respond because they're members of the switch group spines, not leaves. So let's move this out of the way. I'm going to go back to switch 1 or spine 1, because another trick that we have is, what if I'm logged into a switch and if I would like to send commands to another switch via XMPP? Let's send a message from switch 1 to switch 2 asking for switch 2's hostname out of its running configuration. To do this, we use the XMPP send command. So we're going to type XMPP space send space S2 at arista.lab space, and then the word command, and we're going to send it the show run, and then we're going to do a pipe grep, -I to ignore case, and then host name. So from switch 1 to switch 2 via XMPP, we're going to ask switch to send us its host name. I'm going to hit enter, and you can see I have a message from user S2 at arista.lab, and he sent us his hostname configuration, hostname space S2. Another issue that may come up is perhaps we're using our management interface for all this management type connectivity out of band or ILO. And we've placed the management interface into its own VRF for the purposes of keeping the management interface out of the default global routing table. It's a common practice. So there's no worries with that. Arista's XMPP configuration supports the use of VRFs. So in Management XMPP configuration mode, you simply specify the VRF that XMPP needs to use. So let's do an example where I'm going to use the VRF management-VRF. So we're going to type config, hit enter, management XMPP, enter to get into XMPP configuration mode. And then we're going to type VRF and our VRF definition. So it's going to be management-VRF and hit enter. And now all the XMPP communication from this switch will use the VRF and come from our management interface. As you can see, using this feature is free, and you have a free open source software that you can take advantage of for instant messaging and chatting with your switches. This feature comes in handy for both operations as well as saving time on multiple switch configuration changes. As always, you can find documentation about Jabber or XMPP in the Arista configuration guide. Additionally, you can find several well-written articles on Arista's EOS Central website.